Good morning, folks. Thank you all for being here. I'm Darrell Sukdeo, representing the Indo-Caribbean community. With me today on the panel is Richard David, and one more gentleman we're still waiting to come in, Roy Danraj. A few years ago, I've had a long history with AARI from the very beginning in 2001 when Dr. Tam started. He invited me to be part of AARI and to, contribute. And I willingly accepted and came on. So I've been involved with AARI since the beginning. And one of the reasons for that was to marry my community within the rest of the Asian community so that everyone could understand who we are, not just as Asian Indians from the Caribbean, but also as part of this New York City Asian community. So over the years, we've done quite a few things with AARI, including the first ever Caribbean Asians Conference conducted by CUNY, anywhere in CUNY. We conducted that back in 2007, which at the time we presented an overview of the community as well as specific breakout details about the community. So today, this conference, we want to give you an update of what has happened in the last decade and how that impacts on the overall Asian community. And how does it add to the community? So we're going to talk about specific things. We're going to talk about religion. We're going to talk about economics. And we're certainly going to talk about civic participation and engagement. So thank you all for coming. And we're going to give little bits. Everybody's going to talk a little bit about their area of expertise. Then we're going to ask questions among each other. Then we're going to field questions from you guys. Thank you for being here. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the economics within the community. And I'm going to frame it within the context of the 2009 real estate crash that affected everyone, what it was like before and what it has happened since. So, like many immigrant communities, the Indo-Caribbean community is quite industrious, hardworking, big savers, belief in education, home ownership, and community. So every immigrant who comes, works hard, buys a house, make sure they pay their mortgage, make sure the kids get the best education that they can give them. And that happened, and so as a result of that, there was a massive economic boom in the community before the crash. Real estate was very, very hot. In fact, Richmond Hill, Ozone Park, the Little Guyana community, was consistently rated one of the best real estate markets in the country because of the vibrancy and the constant change. Plus you had families who would come together and the whole family would pay for a house quickly within 10 years, buy another one as an investment, and that sort of economic activity generated a lot of downstream business activity as well. The main corridor, which is Liberty Avenue between Van Wyck Expressway, and Woodhaven Boulevard, that's the main shopping corridor, became essentially the second most vibrant community in South Queens, second only to Jamaica. It's so vibrant that we tried to start a bid there, and unfortunately the first time it didn't work out. We have a second opportunity now trying to get the bid going. Hopefully it will work out this time, but getting businesses to buy in has been the difficult part of that. Nevertheless, prior to the housing crash, economic activity was very, very vibrant. The last economic study we did showed that 93% of businesses in that area was owned or operated by the Indo-Caribbean community. That has changed significantly since the economic crash. One of the significant changes is that a lot of people have lost their houses because they got into bad loan situation. And I think this is endemic for most communities around New York City, but in our community it was, quite glaring. A lot of people lost their houses because they didn't understand the loans they were getting into, because the real estate agents and the mortgage brokers were not motivated to really educate them properly about the types of loans they were getting into. So people didn't quite understand some of the loans they were getting into. So when the the big numbers started to hit them, they couldn't pay back the loan, so a lot of people lost. Not just as a result of the housing crash, but as a result of getting into these bad loans. And we lost, of course, a lot of real estate businesses and a lot of other businesses closed down as a result of the crash. Economic activity. I think the numbers, if I remember correctly, for New York City and Queens in particular, was something in the order of 60% of a drop in economic activity as a result of the crash. That's significant. It affected everyone. A lot of businesses closed down. But what has happened is we've seen a transition. We have a very large, vibrant Sikh community and a smaller Bangladeshi community in Little Guyana now. And they moved in and they took up a lot of the business spaces. So along the corridor, now you're seeing a lot of different types of businesses. As well as what happened is that a lot of the Korean greengrocers expanded within the community. So now we have, we certainly not at 93% INdoCaribbean ownership and running. I don't know what the new numbers are, but if I'm to venture a guess, because I'm there every single day, I can give you an educated guess. It's probably more like 75% now. It's still very high. It still demonstrates the entrepreneurial and industrious nature within the community and the impact we've had on New York City. The other big factor for us is that household income, the last economic study we did found household income to be around $65,000 on average for the Indo-Caribbean community, combining both Trinidadians and Guyanese, which is significantly higher than the New York City average, even the New York State average or even the national average, which means we pay significantly more taxes than, most other communities. The actual numbers, we can look it up, but now that has changed. I'm sure that has changed significantly. It's probably not quite as high as $65,000 for average household income anymore. I honestly don't know the new numbers, but as part of the new bid, we are going to do that economic study again. So hopefully in a year or so when we come back, I'll have those numbers for you. Some of the really encouraging things for me in the community is that people have not really lost their spirit. Maybe they've lost resources, but they haven't lost the spirit for who they are and what they want to do. We still see that all the time. I'm a business coach, that's my profession. I still see a lot of people who are talking about starting businesses and doing businesses or, expanding what they're doing now. So we are coming back again, back up into, the way it was before the housing bubble crash in 2009. So some of the interesting things you would find if you visit Richmond Hill, and I encourage you guys to jump on the A train and come on down to Richmond Hill. It's the last stop on the Ozone Park A train. You get off there and you're going to be smelling curry and roti, and you can have curry duck or curried goat or curried beef or chicken or shrimp. You can have some pilau or some, bacon shark. You guys have to try bacon shark. But you should come and see. There's a lot of economic activity, a lot of things that you would find familiar, a lot of things that you would be impressed. There are a lot of sari shops, a lot of beautiful dress shops for the women. There are, of course, roti shops. One of the things that I wanted to mention before and after the crash, two sets of businesses were less affected than all the others, and that's rum and roti. So the roti shops kept going, the rum shops kept going. Other than that, every other type of business was affected. Some of the other things that are attractive economically, you would find a proliferance of franchises. You name it, it's in Richmond Hill, including banks. Every bank, including some you never heard of, is in Richmond Hill because we're such a big saving community. Back in 2001, Citibank, I don't know about the others, but Citibank in Richmond Hill had the largest this depositor base outside of Manhattan, anywhere in New York City, and that tells you a lot about our community, how much we save, and how much we like to plan for the future, how much we love our houses and take care of our houses. If you walk through the neighborhoods of Richmond Hill, Ozone Park, Little Guyana, you would see the most ornate fences anywhere in New York City. This is something common to us back in Caribbean, right? Fancy bricks, ornate wrought iron, stainless steel. You know, I have a bunch of pictures, I should have brought them to show you guys, but you know what, that's an excuse for you to come to Richmond Hill and visit us, right? Feel free to reach out to me or Richard or Roy, any of us on the panel. We'd be happy to do a tour in Richmond Hill. I've already told Joyce we should do a monthly tour of Richmond Hill. Let folks come on down, and then the casino is right there, so you could tour Richmond Hill, have a good time, then go to the casino and try to win some money. Right? There's so many good reasons to come to Richmond Hill. If not for the roti and rum, then for the casino. But in terms of economic activity, it's really, really, really very vibrant. And one of the things that I like to see between our community and the new Asian Indian communities in Richmond Hill, the Sikh and the Bangladeshis, is that there's a lot of cross-pollination. They understand us, they know us, they see the culture is similar to theirs, and vice versa. So we shop from them, they shop from us, and we all build each other up stronger, right? And I think one of the strongest thing about the Richmond Hill Little Guyana community is that as a community, you know, many New Yorkers are not really familiar with who we are and what we're like, but as a community, you know, we love entertaining people. Aside from love entertaining, I mean, Trinidadians are quite party people, Guyanese not so much, but they're learning from us. But we love entertaining people, we love showing off. That's endemic within our culture. So I welcome you to come and let us show off our neighborhood. I'll hand it over to Richard to talk a little bit about civic engagement.
Okay, that's going to be hard to follow, talking about roti and curry. Good morning, everyone. I am Richard David. I am the executive director and a co-founder of a nonprofit in Richmond Hill called the Indo-Caribbean Alliance. The organization was founded in 2008, and it's focused on providing programs and advocacy to residents in Richmond Hill and the surrounding areas. Our programs seek to empower youth in our community through mentoring, education, and community involvement. Our advocacy work gives a voice to Indo-Caribbean communities on issues that affect them, and we seek to mobilize the Indo-Caribbean community through voter registration and voter turnout. We seek to mobilize Indo-Caribbeans to stand up and to take a position on issues that affect them. Things like Darryl mentioned, the casino being next door and being a very visible presence in our community. And we also make sure that Indo-Caribbean voices and perspectives are a part of conversations and discussions around Asian American policies and politics and the general discourse that occurs in New York City that shapes the way that laws and legislation gets enforced. Today, I will touch on a couple of things, including civic engagement, identity, and I want to talk about the numbers, because it seems to, following the presentation earlier this morning, it seems to be something that's particularly relevant to this setting. I want to just take a small step back and talk about where this term Indo-Caribbean comes from. It's a new term. It's an American invention in a lot of ways. And you'll find that people in the Caribbean, and maybe even people outside of New York City, it's still a very foreign term. And it was created probably 30 or 40 years ago by organizers and cultural advocates here in New York to bring together communities of Guyanese, Trinidadian, Surinamese, and other Indo-Caribbeans who left India several decades ago and moved to the Caribbean, and then the second wave of migration to New York City. Because of their shared national identities, their political backgrounds, and this common history, there's enough cooperation and collaboration in our communities for them to be under a similar, largely political anchor. And I think that's even more relevant because today, May 5th, we are celebrating something. It's a national holiday in a lot of the countries in the Caribbean. It's called Indian Arrival Day. And it's a commemoration of the Indian voyage from India to the Caribbean, and it's celebrated every year since 1838. And it's celebrated on May 5th every year. So fitting that we're a part of this conference, and it's really just a coincidence, I think, but for us it feels like one way to celebrate and to commemorate as well. I think Daryl was here and worked with Ari and Joyce and really a lot of the forward-thinking and moving organizations 10 years ago to talk about the what at that time was the ever-present Indo-Caribbean community and how they can be a relevant part of the discussion. And it's because of their work that this merger is happening, where for a long time Indo-Caribbeans didn't even see themselves as Asian Americans. And it's something that, as you can see with the presentation earlier today, it still doesn't get included. And it's because of our efforts to continue to have our voice included in narratives like these that we can hope to change that discourse. Let's talk about the census for a minute before we get into the numbers, because it really is a good tie-in between identities and the numbers. During the 2010 census, we made a huge collaborative effort in southern Queens with organizations far and wide to get Indo-Caribbeans to participate and to increase the numbers. And in 2010, we encouraged Indo-Caribbean residents to check off a box that's Asian Indian, and then to write in Indo-Caribbean. Unfortunately, a lot of those numbers were discarded, and it's affected the way policy is made in New York City and how communities like ours get disenfranchised. The numbers. Indo-Caribbeans started arriving in large numbers in the United States around the mid-1960s, which is a coincidence of a couple of historical facts, including independence in the Caribbean, and also the civil rights movement in America that allowed for a more liberal interpretation of American immigration policies. And this resulted in people from Guyana and Trinidad and other places coming to the United States and to Britain and other Caribbean countries in massive waves. And these migration patterns continued, and it continued particularly for Indians and Indians out of Guyana because of what they felt were persecution under dictatorship that was present in Guyana up until 1991. And after the democracy was restored in 1991, it seemed like an even bigger wave of Indians were seeking to leave the country, because that's when we saw perhaps the largest wave of Indo-Guyanese coming particularly to New York. In the earlier panel, from the Planning Commission, they mentioned population statistics and how that's relevant to Guyanese and Indo-Caribbean communities. And I want to, behind me, it's a population analysis of Guyanese and Trinidadians in New York City, and it's really it extrapolates a lot of the data that's in the Planning Commission's report, and it's relevant, and it compiles data on Guyanese and Trinidadian residents in New York City. And I encourage you, if this is something that you're teaching in your classrooms, or if this is something that's a part of your organizing work, that you take a look at it. It's at INdoCaribbean.org/blog, B-L-O-G. And a lot of that data is there. And what I'd like to do is just go over some of that information here as well, because I think once you hear the numbers, you'll be shocked, and because I certainly am, and a lot of people I tell, they're shocked as well, that such a large majority of people would be disenfranchised in such an obvious way. When you look at the population of Queens, it's, we have everyone there. But the second largest immigrant group in Queens, based on the city's data, they're Guyanese. After the Chinese, they're the second largest immigrant group. And that's startling, because how can you ignore the second largest immigrant group? And how can you continue to perpetuate data that doesn't reflect that? And how can you claim that it's accurate and that it's statistically significant? When you combine Guyanese and Trinidadians together, which is what we've done by calling ourselves Indo-Caribbean, they would be the third largest immigrant group in all of the 5 boroughs. Now that's, I think, shocking data, and that's significant data, and that's data that doesn't really get talked about. And we have a lot of information that's also extrapolated from that wonderful report that talks and breaks the numbers down into household income, graduation rates, and poverty, and other really insightful statistics. So I encourage you to take a look at that. The last point that I'll mention, and I'd like to talk about, is civic involvement, and particularly civic involvement after 9/11. The migration patterns have changed, and while Indo-Caribbean population trends continue to the United States, a lot of Indo-Caribbean residents who had lived in New York City have begun to move to other places. And while it's still statistically significant numbers here in New York, we're seeing really high numbers in the tri-state area, particularly in New Jersey, in parts of Connecticut. But perhaps the largest growth, and this happened after the housing boom in 2001, Indo-Caribbean sold their homes, and a lot of them moved to Florida. And so in Florida today, you perhaps have the second largest Indo-Caribbean community, and you have direct flights from Florida to the Caribbean to acknowledge this growing population. You also have a very large group of Indo-Caribbeans in places like Schenectady, which before 2001 wasn't even on the map for a lot of the organizing work that gets done in New York. And today, we continue to do a lot of voter registration and engagement work in Richmond Hill and in South Ozone Park and in Jamaica. And what you'll see is in every single one of these neighborhoods, and it's like 15 neighborhoods, Guyanese are the single largest ethnic immigrant group in these areas. And so when we register these people and we tell them to go out and vote, they do that. And they show up in massive numbers. I think through redistricting and other work that we've done more recently, we're beginning to see that these numbers will actually translate into voter participation and political influence. And I think increasingly we're seeing that politicians are paying more attention to this growing community. While we haven't seen a lot of significant political impact from this community within New York City, we're seeing it outside of the city. The first Indo-Caribbean to be elected to public office is in Schenectady, and one in the New Jersey City Council, Jersey City City Council. And so those are also significant things to keep in mind as we think about population trends post 9/11 and within the last 10 years. The last point is about how the definition of model minorities gets shaped, and where do Indo-Caribbeans fit into that? And what we're seeing in Richmond Hill, and I keep saying Richmond Hill, and I actually mean more of the surrounding areas. It's like Greater Richmond Hill, because it's a very large area. what we're seeing there is graduation rates among young people straddling two extremes. Very often, they're the valedictorians graduating at the top of their class, but more often, they're also the ones dropping out in very high numbers. And so in a school like Richmond Hill, you'll have less than 50% of the students graduating, and it has perhaps the largest Indo-Caribbean population. And that's important because a lot of Indo-Caribbean parents come here and they have a high school education and they speak English. And for the first time, we're going to see an Indo-Caribbean population that's potentially less educated than even their foreign-born parents that brought them here. And so that doesn't fit into this model minority Asian myth that's out there. And so in conclusion, I want to just make a couple of points. The largest South Asian group in New York City are Indo-Caribbeans. They're not Bengalis, they're not Indians from India, they're not Pakistanis. They're Indo-Caribbeans. The largest neighborhood in New York City, the largest South Asian community, is Richmond Hill. We have an economic corridor of over 40 blocks. It's not Jackson Heights, which is just 3 or 4 blocks. And the numbers speak for themselves. And we have the data, fortunately, because of this report. Thank you.
So since our third panelist, Roy, is not here, something serious must have happened. I hope he's all right. I'm going to take a stab at the religion segment. I've been in the community for 15 years. I'm not a religious person myself. I don't attend temple or mosque or anything like that. But I'm in the community. I see what's happening, so I'm going to take a stab at it. I'm going to begin by saying something that may shock you. Little Guyana has the most religiously diverse community, religiously diverse neighborhood in all of New York City. And I challenge anybody to prove me wrong. Let me tell you why I say that. South Queens, we have more than 50 Hindu temples covering every sect within Hinduism. In Little Guyana, there's at least 30. We have Arya Samaj, Hare Krishna, Sanatan Dharma. These are some of the different sects. We also have about 8 to 10 different mosques. We have 2 Muslim schools. We have Christian churches that are Punjabi, that are Malayali from Kerala, that are Spanish, that are certainly American, that are certainly Trinidadian, that are certainly Guyanese. We have Catholic, Baptist, Pentecostal, Episcopal, many of which are Spanish. We have a Spanish church in Richmond Hill that offers a baccalaureate degree and a master's degree in theology in Richmond Hill in Spanish. We also have at least 2 synagogues and at least 1 Mormon church. So those are the numbers. We are the most religiously diverse community or neighborhood in the whole of New York City. Anybody here who does research, prove me wrong, please. So, like all immigrants, when we come here, we bring who we are with us. And a large part of the Indo-Caribbean community is not just religion, but oral traditions. Things are passed down from mother to father to son to daughter through oral traditions, through teaching in the home. And religion and culture for us is very intertwined. So many things that are cultural are also based on religious customs and vice versa. So, as a result, we have a strong religious affinity within the community, regardless of what people's religions are. It's something that they follow through with consistently, week in, week out. I mean, if you walk through Richmond Hill on a Sunday morning, you'd see women and girls in saris walking the streets to temple, right? They go to the temple that's closest to them. They just walked a few blocks or whatever, but that's a common sight to see them in their saris. And for our community, saris is not something that women wear daily, like the Indian community or the Pakistani community. For us, it's the saris. For our women, it's an occasion type of thing. You wear it to temple, you wear it to prayers, you wear it to weddings, parties, that sort of thing. But The same is true for the Muslims and the Christians. You know, you'd see them out on Sundays, going to church. And in the Caribbean, you know, we hear all these things that happened in India and Pakistan, fighting religiously, whatever. That has never been the case in the Caribbean. One of the things that happened when we came from the Caribbean, we were isolated from India. Regardless of what your religion is, you were one community. So I guess in a sense they were forced when they came to the Caribbean to mingle more and be more sharing and caring with each other, regardless of what you were like when you were in India. And that has evolved to today, where in the Caribbean, there's no fighting amongst religions or people of different religions as you would fight it there. Of course, when two guys drink in a rum shop, they will cuss each other. That happens. That's not what I'm talking about. I'm talking within the community environment. In fact, very common in Trinidad, whenever there's Hindu festivals, it doesn't matter who you are, everybody in the village comes together and helps with whatever festivities is going on. Common in Trinidad for Diwali is that we would build bamboo scapes. We'd cut bamboo into pieces and make them into, you know, stars and triangles and roses, and then we would put diyas on them and light them. You know, and everybody in the whole village gets together and does that. It doesn't matter whether you're Christian, Hindu, Muslim, or whatever. Everybody does it. And that same type of collaborative religious inclusion has extended, and that came here with us too. So, for instance, just yesterday, the Interfaith Council for Community Development, which is uniquely Indo-Caribbean, they had an event celebrating Indian Arrival Day in the community, and there were people of every faith there. So that type of inclusion is very common within the community. As you know, we have the largest religious festival in New York City, which is the Holy Parade, also known as Pagua, right? If any of you follow me on social media, you always see the photos and videos I share. Very beautiful, very colorful. But the numbers are around 30,000 every year that come out and participate. It's the single largest religious festival in New York City in terms of pure numbers. The numbers are also supported by the NYPD, who are always ever present. Like the Caribbean, there are many other religious and cultural festivals that we celebrate as a community, including Diwali, which I mentioned before, Eid for the Muslims, certainly, you know, Easter just passed, and our whole community, whether you're Muslim, Hindu, or Christian, everybody's familiar with, you know, Easter and Lenten and all that sort of thing. Because we're so inclusive in the Caribbean, it translates here the same way. I don't know there's much more I can say about religion. You have anything you want to touch on?
I think in terms of religion, you're certainly right. It's a diverse place, and you know, the mayor recently made an announcement that they're going to include 2 of the Eid holidays as well as the Lunar New Year as part of the public school holidays. And that was very welcomed in the community, and we were disappointed that Diwali wasn't included in that. And there's a movement in the community to have Diwali included as well. If I could just mention some of the challenges, which we really didn't discuss. The challenges facing this community is, if I narrow them down to just 3, and Daryl hinted at it a few times when he talked about rum. Alcoholism is a big problem, and it corresponds with the divorce rate. Most Indo-Caribbeans are divorced. A lot. I shouldn't say most. A lot. And a lot of it stems from alcoholism within the household. The other is domestic violence. It's very prevalent, it happens often, and it's also one of the factors that leads to separation and animosity within the household. And the last major issue is perhaps job training and immigration. Not having a lot of Indo-Caribbeans come here undocumented because you can island hop and it becomes pretty easy. And in response to these challenges, there are not a lot of nonprofit organizations or outlets within the community to deal with these issues, and so they continue to perpetuate, and we're seeking to bring partners in that will help us to deal with some of these challenges. And within the last 10 years, that's something that we've seen as well. This very strong partnership with a lot of the Asian American organizations that are very strong and very established, so they can be present in serving this community. Sure.
Please go to the mic.
The question was, how do you define Indo-Caribbean? And that's a great question. And there's so many angles to that, but the narrowest definition are people who trace their ancestry to South Asia and live in the greater Caribbean region. And so those countries are primarily Guyana, Trinidad, and Suriname, where the majority are Indians, but also in places like Jamaica, Grenada, Barbados, where the second largest group are usually Indians. Absolutely.
Hi, I got a question. We're talking about issues and defining ethnicities and everything. And to be integrated into the community, we also need to deal with the idea of politics, all right? We need to have our community understand that part of being in this community is to be involved in politics. It happens in the Jewish community. It happens in the Latino community. It happens in the Black community. But the Asian community, the Southeast Asian community, so to speak, doesn't have that foothold. It doesn't have the Al Sharpton or anybody else out there saying, hey, I'm holding the banner up for us. So how do you feel that we can change this? All right, how do we get this paradigm shift where we've made our communities economically feasible, we've made our communities somewhat socially feasible, but we really haven't had the politics, the impact. When something happens, if there's a pothole in the street, do we get it fixed? Do we get on TV saying we've accomplished this? So that's my question or statement. Thank you.
It's a great point. Thanks for the question. I'm going to take a stab at it. Historically, we've had low voter turnout. We've had, that's one of the reasons for it. Also, I mean, to date, we haven't had a single individual figure that was really, that prominent and that motivational and inspirational to really engender a groundswell. We haven't had that. We've had a struggle. We continue to have a struggle getting people to come out and vote. In the past, we've had many Indo-Caribbean people run for public office, city council in particular, and I've been involved in some of those campaigns. And, when you do a door-to-door knock, people would just lie to you. Yes, I'm registered to vote, but the reality is they're not registered to vote. And, you know, you would say, okay, well, we will come and pick you up to go and vote. Is that okay? No, I can get there. My car is parked right there. I'll get there. Don't worry about it. And historically, we've only had around between 5,000 and 6,000 people coming out to vote every cycle. And that doesn't reflect our numbers, obviously. So at this point, I'm personally at a loss how to effect change other than saying, look, you show up to vote, you're going to get $20 cash in your hand. I don't know what else to do. Richard?
I mean, I think definitely people showing up to vote makes the difference. But I also think there are structural reasons why, even if you have significant numbers and you show up to vote, it'll matter very little. And I think that's what we're seeing in South Queens. You know, I think a lot of, actually I know a lot of the residents in South Queens vote Democrat regardless. It doesn't matter. You show up to the polling booth, it doesn't matter who the candidate is. You're voting for party very often because you identify with national politics and the Democratic Party, but not at the local level. And when we talk about, you know, about the census and how it allows communities to be disenfranchised, those numbers that are collected through census data and the ACS, the American Community Survey, they influence how district lines are drawn at the very local level. And the Democratic Party and incumbents have never really had legally the opportunity to look beyond it, because the census allows them to look in a very narrow lens of how they're drawing those district boundaries. And consistently, those lines have been drawn to disenfranchise the Indo-Caribbean community in South Queens. Most recently, in the 2010 redrawing of district lines in South Queens, we were successful in advocating for them to be brought together. In the State Assembly, there were 6 assembly people to represent Richmond Hill. 6. And so when you make a phone call to say, they're not cleaning my street or this tree fell, they tell you, you know, I care a lot, but you're 5% of my district, so I'm going to focus on the 95%, which is reality, and, you know, that's how it is. And at the city council level, there were about, I think, 4 council members to represent Richmond Hill, and it's a similar story. After redistricting, those numbers have narrowed significantly. Richmond Hill is more united in one city council district than it's ever been before. And at the State Assembly, it's not perfect, but it's a lot better. And I think paying attention and focusing, unless you have a transformational leader, like you said, Al Sharpton, the district lines will matter, and they will matter for a long time. But the larger Asian community has been very successful in electing people to office. John Liu is one of the transformational people that we've seen who's Asian American in New York City. You know, he's won a citywide office.
Well, finally our third panelist has arrived. Roy, come on up. So hopefully Roy can give us a little more details about the talk on religion. Roy, I just basically introduced that we have so many different religions, but I wasn't able to go into very much detail. So I'm going to ask you to talk a little more in detail about the religion within the community.
Okay, thank you, Darren. First, I must apologize for being late now. 2.5 hours on the E train. They had a derailment the other day, and they're still working on it. Good morning, only just. Firstly, I must thank the organizers of this event for inviting me here today. Thank you. The subject I hope to present to you today is in the New York Indo-Caribbean diaspora, the religious life of the community, along with its appendages. The Indo-Caribbean peoples originated from India, so I should start briefly by explaining how they got to the Caribbean islands and, of course, Guyana, Suriname, French Guyana, also known as Guyana, and latterly, hence to North America. The migration from India, briefly, was from the year 1834 to 1917. Circumstances surrounding that is that after the abolition of slavery, the former slaves refused to work for the low wages and bad conditions on the sugar farms in those countries. And indentured labor was a system where they had brought Indian and Chinese people to different parts of the British Empire. And they thought they would do that to replace the slave labor on the sugar plantations. And so they did that. In the thousands, about 2 million Indians were transported to 19 colonies, including places like Fiji, Mauritius, Guyana, then British Guyana, the Caribbean islands, and Malaysia, Uganda, Kenya, and South Africa. Now, the British derogatively called them coolies, which meant like a porter or laborer. They were recruited from India and signed a contract in their own countries to work for a period of 5 to 7 years. They were promised wages, some land, passage back to India when they're finished. And in reality, that didn't happen. Their wages were extremely low, the conditions harsh, and almost inhuman at times. And you might have heard some stories about that. The British government then and the plantation owners separated the people of different religions, forbade them to intermarry, and to keep, in their words, to keep peace among them. The government passed laws to prevent this from happening. And they also took people to Trinidad, Jamaica, St. Vincent, Grenada, St. Lucia, Martinique, Guadeloupe, and several other islands, and also Belize, Suriname, Belize in Central America, Suriname in South America, and French Guyana. And you know, they built up huge farms and small farms and became doctors and lawyers and had businesses. Like people from the East do that a lot. Wherever they go, they set up and become very successful, very industrious. And they started to migrate to North America when there were political upheavals in their country. And that started in the 1960s. It rapidly grew to large amounts in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. And now we have the Indo-Caribbean Americans from that, the result of that migration. Quite a lot are in Florida, in Georgia, Alabama, in Carolinas, Maryland, California, Minnesota, Pennsylvania, a lot in New Jersey, Long Island, and in the 5 boroughs area, there are quite a lot. And today, we're gonna probably deal in the area where we're from. In Queens, there's Queens Village, Jamaica. In the Richmond Hill area in South Ozone and Ozone Park, they have up to 250,000 Indo-Caribbean Americans living there. And included in that total are some of the children and grandchildren of people who migrated. They were all called Indo-Americans, Indo-Caribbean Americans. Now, the Hindus are a large multi-sect group, being Sanatans, Arya Samajis, the ISKCON, Krishna consciousness people. And they're known, I think they're more popularly known as the Hare Krishna people. And so they also have a lot of Muslims of 2 different sects, sects, S-E-C-T-S. The Christian groups are Baptists, Methodists, Lutherans, Episcopal, Pentecostals, etc. And there's some Seventh-day Adventists and Jehovah's Witnesses. There are about 30 Hindu temples in the area of Richmond Hill, Ozone Park, about 9 or 10 mosques, dozens of Christian churches of all denominations. There are at least 2 synagogues and a Mormon church. And there are also a few Sikh temples like the Gurudwaras and 1 or 2 others of Jain religion and Buddhists. You really will want to see the Hindu temples. They're decorated inside with ornate statues and of the deities with full resplendent costumes, etc. And now you can imagine with this absolute conclave of Indian, Indo-Caribbeans of religious diversity. It makes the Richmond Hill area perhaps one of the most religiously diverse communities in the United States. With the majority being Hindus and Muslims and Christians, of course, they also boast several Indian classical dance schools, dance academies, music schools for playing instruments and Indian classical singing, also Bollywood singing, as you may know, and dancing. Now, there are over 300 stores, ethnic stores, including Indian, West Indian, Chinese, Korean, Spanish, Punjabi, Pakistanis, and Bengali stores. And they all intermix in the area and supply the needs of the community. Now, there are several ethnically owned supermarkets, electronic stores, dozens of fashion outlets, real estate offices, doctors' offices, insurances, mortgage offices, and you can go on, travel agency, record stores, supply stores, several national service providers for cell phones, etc. Several banks are there because people need the bank the money and the bank need the business, so they come where the money is. It's really an industrious area. It used to be mom and pop shops. Now everywhere has opened up, and it's a bit like people do in Flushing or Jackson Heights. They just explode the area with businesses and community events, etc. Now, this immense diversity attracts a lot of visitors, plethora of visitors, shoppers, and people who come to worship from all over to acquire Indian clothing, religious items, instruments and groceries, vegetables, and really, really hot peppers that would probably make the jalapeno pepper taste like a candy. Really, really hot. You know, for the religious and cultural aspects and the activities, they also conduct the very popular annual Phagwa parade in March, the brightly colored and lit Diwali motorcade in the evening, and that's in October, along with several other religious and cultural parades in the area. Now, I must tell you, Richmond Hill also serves the most authentic and delicious Indian and Caribbean foods in the country, with restaurants and takeaways all over the place. There is the Richmond Hill Economic Development Council, which encourages you to grace the area for shopping and worship, especially Liberty Avenue. This is the central thoroughfare, with several other thoroughfares coming in there. Now, as for the religious life in the community, the life in general is intertwined between religious, cultural, ethnic, national, commercial, professional offices, and the one thing that they all do have in common, as they're proud Americans, they've come to this country. We have the First Amendment, religious freedom, and I lived in England 21 years, and there was freedom to an extent, but not like we have in this country. So we're all happy to be in North America and enjoy the niceties of this society. And that's why we can flourish so much. Now, in the parades that they have, all the elected officers have attended all these parades, and you can go to places where it's very convenient. The parkways are there, the Belt Parkway, Grand Central Parkway, the Long Island Expressway, Southern State, Jackie Robinson, the Van Wyck. There are 2 airports nearby, and it makes this area this religiously diverse area, an experience by itself. And we are very proud to be part of that. Now, as for me, I've been married 46 years to the same woman. We have 2 grown children. They were born in England and brought up here. 3 grandchildren. My son is ex-US Air Force. My daughter is an auditor and wedding planner. And you would find the things I'm telling you now about my family. A lot of families have developed in this way in the community, with tremendous professional ability in their studies, believing in education. My wife is a retired British trained nurse in charge. I'm an ex-police officer, ex-British Army, and formerly British trained engineering instructor in England. I came to New York in 1986, And currently, in the way of my active profession, I'm a New York State real estate broker, state certified real estate appraiser, state certified defensive driving course instructor, and Department of Motor Vehicle Driving instructor and classroom teacher. And I'm also a tax return preparer. So I do all of those. We have offices here and there. And you would find, as I said, a lot of people engage in these several activities, keeping busy. We have this thing about Alzheimer's. It's not going to happen if you keep the brain active. So if you do all these things together, you diversify your thoughts, your religious diversity. And there are a lot of people like me in the community, you know. Some of the things I do for my community, and many of us do, has caused me to be elected over the past 28 years to serve as General Secretary of a temple called the Durga Shiva Temple, Organizing Secretary, and now Second Vice President of the Federation of Hindu Temples, the Organizing Secretary of the Hindu Parades and Festival Committee, Director of Youth Affairs, and Treasurer of the Indo-Caribbean Council, General Secretary for the Indo-Caribbean Federation, and President of Sri Radhakrishna Hindu Temple, and also currently President of the Hindu Parade and Festival Committee. Now, there are a lot of people who do a lot of stuff like this for the community, and that's what builds the strength and the cultural and religious activities in communities like ours. Now, in the Richmond Hill area, I personally worked and owned several businesses. I know about 50% of the business owners, as these gentlemen here also do. We interact. The INdoCaribbean Alliance is part of that community, very strong. Worked alongside most of the community leaders and the police department, senior staff, community affairs officers. And many of the elected officials we work along with, because you have to, they need us, we need them, we need services, and so we interact with the community. And so these people, these elected officials also come to the marches, they come to their events, they speak, and they feel comfortable to be among this very diverse Indo-Caribbean cultural and religious community. Now I thank you, and I do offer my sincere gratitude for being invited here today again, and I do thank you for listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Roy. I wanted to ask you a follow-up question. You're second vice president of the Federation of Hindu Mandirs.
Yeah.
See you very knowledgeable about the Hindu community. Can you talk a little bit about changes in this decade versus the last decade, the 90s and the 2000s, within the Hindu community? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Well, there has been an explosion of Hindu temples, the number of Hindu temples in the area, the Richmond Hill area, and in Queens in general. They have in some areas large temples that people come from near and far, and other areas people would prefer to walk to their temple. So that's why you have a lot of local temples. And as you might know, a lot of churches and temples start in basements. They graduate to the first floor, they buy a property, a warehouse or an old garage, and they convert it, and then they make it very ornate. And this has been going on from the 70s, 80s, 90s. And there was an explosion in the 90s and in the 2000s, this century. It's developed so much that people are saying we have too many temples. But if a temple has 50 people going or 100 people, and another one opens up and they have 50 or 100, is it too much? Or are there too many? There are, as I said, about 30 Hindu temples.
Yes.
And they have various sects, different denominations, as it would be called. the Sanatanists, the Arya Samajas, the Hare Krishna people. They're Buddhists and Jain, and so there are various sects. There is also the Gurudwaras, which the Punjabis, the Sikhs, and so there's a lot of those in the area. It is very rich in this kind of diversity. And the clothing people wear to go to the temples, the businesses there make a good living by importing those from India, Pakistan, and you might be interested to know some of it comes from Hong Kong, some from Taiwan, some from China, some from Korea, a lot from India, a lot from Bangladesh. And so whoever makes it, they buy it. And that's what's happening there in that area.
Thank you, Roy. We have a question?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you for a wonderful, can you hear me?
Yes.
For a wonderful panel and for a great conference. I'm sorry I had to miss Joe Salvo's presentation earlier. I heard it was terrific. Look forward to reading the report, seeing the videotape. So the question I had actually for you all was, I think Mr. David had mentioned earlier that there's kind of a bifurcated educational profile amongst the children of Indo-Caribbeans, particularly in Richmond Hill, so that you have the kind of high achievers and then, for lack of a better word, the low achievers, folks who drop out of high school or whatnot or don't do as well. So I was curious about, from your community work, why you thought that might be the case, since you did also say that immigrants tend to have a high school education, right? So if their kids are not doing well in school, they're really doing poorly relative to their parents. But then you also mentioned that some of the immigrant parents might have issues with single-headed households and domestic violence and whatnot. So I'm just curious. Thank you.
I'll let Richard answer that question in a minute, but I want to say that for the most part, our kids live two lives. They have one life that they live in the home with their parents, and when they go out in the school, they live a different life, which is obviously influenced by their peers, and that certainly contributes to it. American culture is very powerful. Mainstream culture is very powerful. It's a very powerful draw, and that influences them significantly as well. So all those factors contribute to what we're seeing today. Richard?
Thank you for the question. The dichotomy that exists among young people in our community, it's probably a reflection of what we're seeing in the broader community around them. I think what we're seeing within the schools is the same thing. I don't think it's vastly different. I think particularly around young males, we see those students who've migrated to the United States, let's say they come preteen or as teenagers, they have a very hard time assimilating within a school system, and a school system where it's cool to be kind of gangster, to have to fit in. And that population group perhaps has the highest dropout rate, just because of the pressures among their peers to fit in.
I think also one of the things that's endemic within the New York City school system and many other places around the country is that success is not seen at school. So the opposite of success is what all the kids are influenced to aspire to. And that is certainly endemic in our community as well. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Mitch Wu from the Coalition for Asian American Children and Families. I also lecture in Asian American Studies at Hunter College. And I'm also from Queens, so I love Bake and Shark, or Shark and Bake.
Thank you.
I would like the panel to share a little bit more insight on the concept of identity for the community. Now, there have been times throughout the panel that it's been framed that there's kind of like this pan-Indo-Caribbean kind of concept of identity, but there's also other times when it sounds a lot more nuanced as well, right? There's multinational, multi-faith, multi-ethnic, and I'm sure even multiracial, right? And so if you could share a little bit more insight on how the community draws its affinity, what draws its identity, right, in terms of those concepts, then you could also share a little bit more about how one will go about understanding those particular nuances and those particular dynamics to then strategize and build power, right? And organize and mobilize the community.
Great question. I'm so glad you asked. Thanks. It's actually something I've thought about a lot lately because I'm trying to pull people together in the community to create Richmond Hill into an ethnic destination like Flushing is or Chinatown. And asking those questions is some of the things we've been doing. How do we create an ethnic identity for the community? And obviously that has to come from the identity of the community of who we are. I'll start by telling you my own identity, how I identify myself. First, I'm Trinidadian. Second, I'm Indo-Caribbean. Third, I'm Guyanese. And I'm certainly American, right? My father was Guyanese, my mother was Trinidadian. I was born in Guyana and raised in Trinidad. So I'm literally half and half. So I identify as Trinidadian, Indo-Caribbean, Guyanese, and American, right? That's me. The same is common for a lot of people in the community. First, they identify as their home country, which is Guyana, but more and more now in the community, people are identifying and, really holding on to this identity as Indo-Caribbean and what that means. What it means for me is that I'm someone from the Caribbean. I love Caribbean food. I love Indian food. I certainly love our culture. I love to party. I grew up partying in Trinidad. I love to do that. I love everything associated with Carnival. My favorite thing is Steel Pan, which we have in Brooklyn, which I'm very proud of. And in terms of a single identity, I like to make the analogy of Trinidad food. Trinidad food, there's no one dish that you can call Trinidadian cuisine. There's so many dishes that you can call national dishes. You have roti, you have bacon shack, you have pilau, you have crab and callaloo. These are all things that make up Trinidad cuisine. There's no one dish you can call it. So it's the same as an Indo-Caribbean. Our identity, there's multiple things that impact on who we are. Certainly food, culture, industrious and entrepreneurial spirit, certainly. That ideal of gaining the best education, in our community, we are also very competitive amongst ourselves. One of the results of that is we have over 100 cricket teams competing for small prizes, $1,000 in leagues and so on. But there's, a dozen leagues and over 100 cricket teams because we're so competitive. Economically, we're competitive. In sports, we're competitive. And in education, we are competitive. So all of this comprises who we are as a community. How we frame that and tell it to you, I'm not there yet. So I'm going to have to give you the whole hodgepodge and mix, and hopefully, there's something in there that you can latch on to and identify as some type of affinity with you and your culture. Richard?
I don't have much to add to that, except that I wouldn't rely on the New York Times to accurately profile our community.
I just wanted to add something about when the children in the schools and the dichotomy of different lives, in school life and home life and community life. There is a very strong sense of personal discipline, cultural discipline among people from the East. They have an absolute respect for their parents. When they grew up, they say your guru, your teacher, your first gurus are your parents. And they grew up with that. And they have this amount of abject respect for their parents. That is one thing, one discipline that they learn in the home life. Additionally, with regards to the food is developed with English, Indian, heavily Indian. There is even a thing called Guyanese-style Chinese food. And a lot of Chinese people went to Guyana in the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and 70s. And a lot of Guyanese people learned to cook the food. Chinese people cook Indian food. So there's intermix. And as to this merging and fusion of people from different nationalities in the Richmond Hill area, I was born in Guyana. My grandparents were from Uttar Pradesh in India. I went to England. My children were born there. We migrated to North America. And my daughter is married to My son-in-law is Guyanese. My daughter-in-law is from Kansas. And so we're intermixing in the Indian society to some degree, but keeping our ethnic purity to another degree. And I think it's the American way. In a way, they say New York is a melting pot. It is to an extent, but also there is ethnic purity, the conclave of ethnic pride, that you are proud from whence you came. You're Indian, you're Guyanese, you're Trinidadian, Jamaican, and one of the most important things that we take a lot of pride in, you're proud to be Americans. So the intermix has actually worked. And there's an explosion of businesses, religious, cultural activities, and it really works. And you're proud of all from whence you came. There is one thing, there are 3 lines that say, in Hindi they say, "My kaun hu," who am I? And that doesn't mean my name. That means who am I in the essence of my family, my background. "Mai kahan se aaya," where have you come from? You have come from all these backgrounds. And if you have those in your head, and that's part of your identity, then you will know some of the other one, which is called "Mai kaha ja raha hu," where am I going? Where am I going in this life with my family, my people, and my community? And as to the identity that Darrell mentioned, and the ethnic identity, the Indo-Caribbean identity, I think just by happenstance it has been developed, and everybody doing their own thing, and they have these organizations. But I don't think there's been a program to set up to establish, maybe, and the question was a good one, that they should be, among the community leaders, we could probably take the initiative and pioneer an effort to set up a program so that we do establish this identity that we've created in the area where we live. Because there is no such one at the moment. It just happened that your presence has established your identity more than a program preset for that.
Roy mentioned Guyanese Chinese food. It is the most popular kind of Guyanese food you would find in Richmond Hill. So if you want to know what Chinese food from Guyana tastes like, guess where you got to go? And that brings me to the information on the screen. That's my contact information and Richard's. Don't hesitate to contact me if you want to come in Richmond Hill. I'll give you a tour. Also feel free to contact Anthony or Joyce at AAARI to arrange a tour. We have no problem doing that. It would include a tour of the Strip, a tour of a Hindu temple, of a Sikh Gurdwara. We can even take you to a nightclub. I have friends with nightclubs. We can make some cocktails for you guys. We can do a Caribbean party, teach you to dance some chutney and calypso. You know, make it a fun outing. So come on down. Any other questions?
Yes, please.
I grew up in New York. I went to actually medical school here, but I've been away for quite a while. And I've been living in Hawaii. And getting used to the tropical island life, I've developed an interest in the Caribbean, and I'm planning a trip to Jamaica. I have a good friend that's actually Trinidadian and a Guyanese, but I'm planning a trip to Jamaica. So I'm wondering just like, what are some common threads between the countries that you guys are from, and then with the Jamaican culture? Do you see? Yeah.
Well, for one thing, we all in the Caribbean, we all have beautiful beaches. The best beach in the Caribbean is in Trinidad, though, and Tobago. Don't let anybody tell you otherwise, right? But undoubtedly, the best food in the Caribbean you would find in Trinidad. In Trinidad, we have Indians, Africans, Chinese, Middle Eastern, and certainly Irish, Scottish, English. All these communities have been there for hundreds of years, intermingling. That is why we have such a rich, diverse culinary tradition. And we have so many inventions that came out of Trinidad that you find nowhere else in the world, like doubles. I'm sure many of you never heard of doubles. Doubles is basically chickpeas with flatbread. It's a sandwich. It's the most popular breakfast item in Trinidad. And also here in New York, we have it in Richmond Hill, doubles. Our paratha rotis are this big. Okay, we have griddles, towers that are 4 feet in diameter, which we use for weddings. When you cook one of those, you can feed 20 people. All right? That's an innovation that happened in Trinidad. Everyday towers in the kitchen is this big, it's 24 inches. That's how big we cook our parathas and dal puri rotis. All right? Indian dal puris are this small. Our dal puris are, and when you fill that and you wrap it, 3 people can eat from it. That's Trinidad dal puri. Bacon shark, that's a Trinidad innovation invention. All right, it's fried shark in fried dough, and you put in, coleslaw. We put in pineapple, tamarind sauce, chutney, hot pepper. And when you put all of that together in there, it's the best sandwich you've ever had. Andrew Zimmern, that crazy guy who eats frogs and cockroaches and all that stuff, he went to Trinidad, he had a bacon shark. He said it's the best fish sandwich he ever ate anywhere in the world, #1. And he's a culinary icon.
I'm going to change my plane ticket to Trinidad.
Huh?
I'm going to change my plane ticket to Trinidad.
Thank you. That's what I was hoping to do.
But, I'm wondering, how many Jamaican friends do you have?
Me?
Yeah.
3.
3?
Yeah, but great friends.
Yeah.
There's about 100,000 Indians in Jamaica, I've heard. I don't know if that number is accurate or not. I was told there's 100,000 people of Indian descent in Jamaica. That's why they have such a good curry goat culture, but they can't make roti to save their lives. I'm sorry.
All right, thank you.
Thank you for your question.
Well, with that, I'd really like to thank our panel for the wonderful information. When
thank you.
Daryl got up to start the program, I didn't introduce him because I know how competitive he is. But also, he's such a pro, and he's so comfortable in our world here with AAARI that I felt no introduction was necessary. And now, you are all going to go to a party with Daryl, because we will work with him and put something up on the website, and perhaps we should go and eat and feast with our new friends here.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you. Now, I have the pleasure of telling you that it's time for lunch. Unfortunately, it's not from Richmond Hill. I should have tried to bring that in, but please go out, have your lunch, and then we'll be starting the session after that. Thank you so much.